Okay, we might as well go ahead and get started. A couple of things before we start. I haven't gotten any emails about people deciding on their groups yet. So if you have formed a group, please do let me know. If you formed a group early on in the term, please send me another email so that I can make sure that that group is still the way you told me it would be. Those people who have not found groups, I have created a discussion page on Brightspace for anyone who feels like they want to reach out and make some new friends or anything of that nature. Also, before the class started, I did get a question on lab number 2. The question was, is it one submission per person or is it one submission per group? Because the deliverable of that lab relates to what framework you will use for your project. It is most certainly an individual submission, as the goal of that lab is to get you to explore and play with different frameworks. So what you're actually submitting is not, this is guaranteed the framework we're going to use, but the framework that you would like to use, so that we kind of understand that you've taken a moment to look at which frameworks you like and for what purpose. Does anyone have any questions on either of those? Okay, last chance. Okay, nope. All right, so in last class, I started talking about the milestone 1. Why is my phone exploding? Please turn this off. Okay. So in last class, I talked about responsive web design and how to make a design or a template for desktop, tablet, and mobile. And I got some messages from people saying they'd never done that before, so I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how that works. I posted a link to W3 Schools on Brightspace, so if you guys can go click there and join me on this page, please. I'll give everyone a minute to do that. I went to go make one of this exact example myself, and I found that somebody had already made it, so I was pretty happy about that. So, can everyone just sort of hit the chat when they're there so I know when I can start going?
Sorry, where's the link?
It should be on Brightspace under lecture, and then the September 22nd lecture. Should be
awesome, thank you.
Right here. Thanks, James, for putting it in the chat, which I should have thought to do. Okay, we got one person ready. Okay, so it looks like we're getting there. So how this works is in your CSS file, you have what are called media queries. And in your media query, you can state the min width or the max width of the screen size that you're using. So for example, we see for tablets, the minimum width is 600 pixels. And for desktop, the minimum width is 768 pixels. And anything less than either of those thresholds is for mobile phones. There are also thresholds for ultra wide desktops, but I don't remember the pixel number off the top of my head. It's 768 is the minimum, not the maximum. So what happens, I think it's around 2000 pixels. There's actually another threshold that's commonly used for ultra wide monitors, but there isn't a tablet made that is bigger than 768 pixels as far as I know. Anyway, this is our way of detecting what kind of device is accessing our site. So from there, with that detection, we can figure out how we want to render the page. So the cool thing about browsers is we can resize them and they will render the screen size for us. So we can see here that I have changed the size to 348 pixels, which is a mobile phone. And you've noticed that the page will reassess itself to be the size of a mobile phone. As I make the page larger or wider, it slowly starts to change its shape. Now I'm about to hit 600. Notice at 600, the orientation of the page has changed. And then once again, at 768, it does it again. So what happens in the CSS folder is there's constantly a mechanism in the browser watching for the width. And it is saying, if your browser is this size, this is the code you are going to run to style the page. If your browser is this side, this is the code you are going to run to style your page. It doesn't matter. There's no CSS query that can't be put in there, but it's basically just an if-else statement saying what kind of device you are using. So for today's participation exercise, what I want everyone to do is take this page, take 10 minutes right now, take this page, make it your own, change the color, change the design, change the fonts, whatever, and show me a page that renders in mobile, tablet, and desktop, submit it as a PDF on Brightspace. And that way you will feel much more confident about designing a responsive website for your final project. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so let's get to work. I'll work on one with you so that we can see what to be done. So first off, let's make this a page. Oh, it's not LaTeX. I can't just click there. Let's make this a page for our course. So let's change the header to CSCI 3172. We can rerun the code, and we've changed that. Yep, just literally take the W3 School page and make it your own. I just want everyone to feel comfortable with the idea of how simple it is to make a website that runs on multiple sites. To be in this course, I expect you all are comfortable with CSS. All I'm doing is introducing a new CSS command that makes it possible to re-render based on screen size. Okay, so now we see that regardless of what screen size I'm using, this header stays the same because the CSS is running. Do we need to cite the page? No, because we're only using this resource. Yeah. Okay, so the thing to keep in mind is that the content you register in the page does not change with the CSS. So I am creating this list one time, and it is rendering for every interface. So you do not need to recreate your content. You just need to decide how your content will render on each screen. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So again, as I change the content, I'm only having to change it once. Is there anyone now that still feels, you can message me privately, that they wouldn't be able to do this for their project, or that it would make their project take longer? Is there anyone still nervous about this concept? Nope. How much more time do you guys want to play with the site? Like 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes? You are allowed to use whatever boilerplate or framework you would like to use. I just want to show that even in the most basic rudimentary way, you can do whatever you want, Jared. But Rebecca, to answer your question, you can use whatever framework, front end, back end, boilerplate framework you want to use to make your website work. I just want to show you that even if you're going with the absolute bare bones approach, all you need are a couple of tags, and you can have a page that resizes in response to the screen size. If you want to, James, if you want to, it's totally up to you. I just want you to, whatever it is you want to feel comfortable with, right? So we can take a look here. We could play with the footer. So let's see. Let's change the footer color. I didn't change it as much as I thought it would. All white, or we can make it all black. Oops. Should our submission have mobile, tablet, and monitor screenshots? Please, just so that you can. So it should be 3 screenshots and 1 PDF. And you see that when I change the colors across all screens, it stays the same. What else should we change? What else would be interesting to change? Sorry, Jane, I am not going to go over Bootstrap. You are welcome to use Bootstrap in your own projects, though. If you want to learn more about Bootstrap, you can make it the focus of your lab too. Can I repeat the submission requirements for the participation? Yes, I can. Just make edits to this page so that it looks like you've actually experimented with the code. I would like a screenshot of desktop, tablet, and mobile devices, all in the same PDF. Would anyone like more time, or should I continue with today's lecture? Can I just get in the chat what people would like me to do? More time? You got it. You guys let me know when you're ready. I want you guys to take the time to 2 to 5 minutes. Okay, that sounds fair. Okay, when you feel like you're ready, just hit the chat, let me know. And Comic Sans sounds like a great addition to this, whoever just posted that. Okay, got one person good to go. All right. +1. Okay, so now we can head back into our lecture on usable security. How many more slides do I have? Okay, I am going to try to finish this slide deck today. We will see what happens. Okay, so in the last class, where did we leave off? I believe I was just about to explain threat modeling. So anytime you have any technology online, anytime you have any technology you're implementing, developing, anytime you've got technology that you're working on, especially with the CS degree, there is a threat model. Every business has a threat model. Actually, you know what? Everything in life has a threat model. What am I saying? So a threat model is when you look at the risks that are available, reasonably available to whatever it is you're trying to do. So in the past, I've talked about the fact that it's impossible to run a bank and not worry about the threat of bank robberies. The threat model for the bank is someone could come in and threaten people and take the asset the bank is protecting. So in their threat model, then they look at how to mitigate that risk. So if you talk to anyone who works as a bank teller, I used to have some friends that did that, they'll tell you that at any given time, the bank probably only has $5,000 of cash in the bank that's available to be used. So if ever you go to the bank and you've got somehow have, like, let's say 20 grand in your account, and you say, I want my account in cash today, they will say, that's funny, we don't do that. What they will tell you to do is call a specific number, make an appointment, and then you go, you meet with someone in the bank, and that special 20K will have been brought in by armed guards or bank security, whoever handles that kind of thing. Then they'll give it to you in a discreet case and you walk out of there. But they don't have that much money in the bank unless there is a need for it. It's the same thing with online applications. But imagine having 20K, forget 20. Thanks, Jared. Like, I relate. When you have an online application, you have threat models. Now, say you're running Facebook. Facebook really is not worried about somebody going to its site and pointing a gun at it. It's just not realistic. What's going to happen? The guy shoots the screen, breaks his own computer. Not much else to be done. What they're worried about is dedicated denial of service attacks, because Facebook downtime is lost money. So for every time, like, I remember the last time Facebook went down, it was down for like an hour and 13 minutes or some hilariously small amount of time. And social media went nuts. And I know I just said Facebook was down and social media went nuts, but every other social media platform was really lit up trying to say, where's Facebook? What's going on? Why is Facebook down? Because they were absorbing all the traffic. And that's a surge of good for Twitter and Instagram. Actually, Instagram's owned by Facebook, but the ones that aren't owned by Facebook. So it'd be a surge of good for Twitter and anything else in the data sphere, that, like Reddit, for example, that Facebook doesn't own. And the reason for that is Facebook makes money off of your user activity. When a site is free, you are the product. So you'll notice if ever you go to a site and you're like me and you've got a VPN and a million blockers on your Firefox, they'll make it really hard for you to get into the site. For example, I once tried to create a Finsta account, and I used a fake phone number. I was on a VPN and I had like some other blocker, and it was like, this account violates our terms of service, because it couldn't track a real person, and therefore they were treating me like a shopper. So Facebook's model is that they need to track you, what you're doing, so they can create a data profile on you and sell it to advertisers. And so their threat model is, what if there's downtime? What if we lose our ability to track people, because for every second they're not tracking you, Amazon and Twitter are tracking you, and they're able to sell the data to advertisers, which means that's lost revenue for them. So that's their threat model. If you're running, let's say, PayPal or Shopify, your threat model is a data breach. If PayPal ever has an Equifax style data breach, hold on. Does everyone know the story of Equifax, by the way? Is there anyone who doesn't know it? So I can explain it if not. Okay, so Equifax is the company in the United States that tracks people's credit scores. And if you have a credit card or line of credit or a mortgage or any credit product in the United States and possibly Canada, they have your profile, and they had a breach of hundreds of millions of records, and everyone's data got out of there. And now no one trusts Equifax, but there's no one else in the US that can step in to take their place. Good point, James. I haven't actually watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix yet, but it feels like work, at least in my line of work. But I should watch it. If anyone does watch it, let me know, and I could possibly award a participation point because it's very interesting. So someone send me an email later about that, and I'll make something on Brightspace. What was I saying? Equifax. So there's no one that can replace them. And so now there's all this big distrust in the credit industry, despite the fact that there's only one big provider. So what I will tell you with absolute certainty, and I almost never say anything with absolute certainty in computer science, is when you are making your website, never, ever, 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 ever handle the financial transactions yourself. I don't care how good of a programmer you are. It's all about managing risk, and it's all about liability. So if you're Shopify or PayPal, these are two companies that are trusted in the world to make transactions. I actually get so annoyed when I'm trying to buy something on a site and they don't have PayPal, because that means I have to go find my credit card, which means I have to get up. It's super annoying. So I trust PayPal a lot. And if PayPal had a data breach, I don't know that I would trust them to handle my finances anymore. So their threat model is not downtime. To them, downtime's not a big deal, because the odds that I'll notice a downtime on PayPal are pretty low, because I might buy something on PayPal 3 times a week actively, and most of the time PayPal is just handling my online subscriptions. So I might not notice that downtime. Like in their time to get back up, I might be asleep. I won't even notice if a subscription fee fails, because like the people that are handling that will know it, then they won't even complain. So that's their threat model, is how are people going to come in and breach our data? Because not only would it take them down and have a huge scandal and that be like a loss of trust, the payload for attacking PayPal is pretty darn good, because that's credit card numbers for everybody. You could sell those on the dark web for a lot. And it's the same thing with Equifax, is all the credit card profiles got sold on the dark web, and then there was an increase in identity theft. So some websites accept Subway gift cards as a form of payment. I wonder how secure those are. If you can find me an example of that, I'd be very curious, because I have never heard of that. Anyway, so this is how we build our threat models. Is things, when you are providing a service, you are basically coming up with something that people want. I don't need a service to do things I can do myself, but there's most things that are possible in this world I don't know how to do myself. If it's not a computer related problem, I'm probably going to hire somebody else to do it, or I'm going to have to research how to do it. Like, I might try to fix my own sink, but I'm never going to try to redo all the plumbing in my house. I bring in the plumber because the plumber's got that knowledge. A plumber threat model is that they'll do a bad job, and that their insurance, they break a house and insurance has to come pay for it. That's their threat model. It's not that bad. But when you provide your service online, there's always the risk that someone can steal away your ability to provide that service and make it less valuable. So if we take the example of the plumber and we put the plumber's skill set online, if somebody could go into your brain and duplicate everything you know how to do that you spent $100,000 trying to learn how to do, and then could sell it at a lower cost, that would kind of be the end of your career as a plumber because people will have cheapened the value. So when you're providing a service, you're providing a valuable thing that you want to protect and distribute at a reasonable price. And so that's when you start looking at threat models is what are the ways that someone can take away the value of what it is you're doing and how you're doing it. Someone can come in and steal your idea. And originally we dealt with that with things like patents and trademarks, like legal ways of saying I had this idea first, but now we've got companies and attackers that can come in and take what you're offering and redistribute it for cheaper. And that's where you get into things like online piracy. So Netflix does a really good job of this. Has anyone ever tried to pirate a Netflix show? Very few. Very few people bother pirating Netflix shows because they wouldn't know about them if they didn't if they didn't already pay for Netflix. So Netflix does this really good job of saying, hey, once you give us money, we will make it easier for you to get the content than it would be to go and get it somewhere else for free. Because once you're in the mindset of I've paid for Netflix, it feels free. And that's a way of limiting the piracy. But the more you try to protect some things, the more privacy increases because it makes the commodity more valuable when it's being exchanged on the dark side. So there's a handful of shows, sorry, I'm going to go back slightly. So I'm a big Apple TV buff. I love my Apple TV. I don't even want to know how much money I've spent building up my library. And the reason my library is so huge is because for small amounts of money, I can buy whatever TV show or movie I want to watch and watch it on all of my devices in high quality. And this is easier than piracy. I don't have to deal with ads. I don't have to deal with clicking a bunch of buttons between each show. It just happens on autoplay, and it's all managed in the cloud for me, so I don't have to download it. So this isn't a sales pitch, by the way. I'm literally just saying how much have I ever used Plex? I tried to use Plex. It's a story for another day. And when I think about this, and then from the Apple TV, I can get Netflix, Hulu, HBO, all of that. And I don't feel the need to pirate because it's too easy. So the threat model used to be people wanted to pirate because they wanted to watch the shows they wanted to watch when they wanted to watch them. And to combat the piracy, rather than saying, let's make it illegal, they said, let's make it easier than stealing. And they changed their model to the subscription model, and it works. So this is ways that things are, these are ways that things are protected against. So a lot of the time when you think about hacking and defending, people think of some dude with a terminal or some girl with a terminal attacking and then a bunch of corporations defending. But really sometimes the best defenses to hackers is changing the way your commodity is presented because people are lazy. And the easiest way to get something is the way they'll go for it. Another thing that's being talked about in the chat is you know how to download a virus scanner to use Netflix. You know it's legit. Like, I don't know how many viruses, RIP to my family computer from 2002 that had LimeWire on it, and I would download pretty much anything I felt like downloading, and I would always be going to Future Shop to get fixed because I was 8 at the time and had no idea what I was doing. And now we're not doing like I remember on LimeWire, I downloaded what I was thinking was a show when it would either turn out to be a virus or a sound clip of Bill Clinton saying something ridiculous. You wouldn't know what you were getting, but now I know I'm getting like good quality stuff. And to that end, back when I lived in Halifax, I used to tutor basically any student from grade 1 to grade 12 in math. And sometimes they would talk about their phones, and I would always get so interested hearing kids talk about their phones because they don't know how good they have it, and especially when they talk about the UI aspects. One of the things they would say is they would make complaints about the way Spotify or Google or whoever presents their music. And I would say to them, you kids don't know how good you have it. Back when I was a kid, if I wanted music on my phone, the metadata wasn't guaranteed to be good. I used to sit out for hours just downloading the cover art, rearranging the music. Like sometimes I would download a song and the title would be the track number, the artist, and by the time the name of the song was said, it would be too much for my MP3 player to play. So I had to guess which one it was. And that was still easier at the time than going on iTunes or collecting CDs, because I was 8. How am I going to collect CDs? But now Spotify makes it easy to download whatever you want, wherever you want, and there's a whole new set of problems. But it's almost completely eliminated the need for peer-to-peer sharing because of how accessible it is. Right, so exactly that's what we're talking about here in the chat. So in the chat, we're saying used to have all these CDs that only hold like 10 songs, and now like my phone, I don't want to call myself an audiophile, but my car setup is pretty choice, and I just put it on like random, like I have this playlist called Windows Down EDM, and it just like smartly finds new music for me while I'm driving up and down the highway. I wouldn't have even dreamed of that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, how I found music was I'd have to be in the car listening to the radio, and when there actually would be a song playing, because there'd be so many commercials on the radio, I'd have to write down the name of the song if they ever even said it. Now it's just like nonstop high quality information. So that has been a big change. Can't even hear the 417 road reading. Yeah, no kidding. I thought you're from Arnfire. Isn't the 417 end up there? You get the good old 17, the 2-lane blacktop. Anyway, what was I saying? So threat model. So basically the whole point of this conversation is when you are creating a service, you have to think about the ways people could exploit it to change the value. And switching to a subscription model is actually a really good way of doing it. The alternative is to a subscription model is an ad revenue based model, and our generation seems to reject that. So one, I'm sure I've talked to you guys about my uncle in advertising that I never agree with on anything. Well, another conversation him and I have is he thinks that millennials and Gen Z people don't want to pay for anything. His belief is that we just want to pirate, we want good media all the time, and we don't care where it comes from so long as it's good. And he's partially correct, because his argument, good point, it's not that we don't want to pay it so we can't afford anything. His argument, and Jared actually just hit it right on the head by saying we pay for only what we want, is if you're a TV network, let's say Fox or ABC or whatnot, and you say, I'm going to make a show, and you come up with a really good show like The Simpsons. And The Simpsons runs for 30 years and it makes probably billions. But there's all other kinds of shows that along the way didn't make it. Like there's one of my favorite shows that never made it was called The War at Home. It was on for 3 seasons, and I wish they continued it. And they canceled it, and because it didn't make nearly as much money as any other show, and nobody watched it. The actors and writers and so forth still had to pay for that. And the issue with that is money that comes from the revenue of The Simpsons has to go to offset those costs. And from there, we need advertising to make sure those costs are good. His quote is, they have to pay for their winners and their losers. But we don't really like that model, because when we think of TV executives, we see them in sports cars and living in nice beach houses. And our argument is, why isn't that person paying for it, being the CEO of the company? And he rejects that. He thinks that people who write commercials and writers shouldn't have to pay for the shows that their co-workers fail. So that's one of our things. And my argument is that subscription-based models are better, because as soon as I pay for a subscription-based model like Netflix, I know as a fact that I am not the product, because the company's money is coming from my subscription revenue. So with Netflix, I know that they don't need to take my data and sell it, because they're using my data and what I'm watching to generate new content so they can ensure they keep my subscription. And that is my view on how services and sites should be monetized. But we still keep these threat models of, how can Netflix lose out? Well, Netflix is currently in the most unenviable PR situation imaginable, because they've got the intersection of two different scandals hitting them at the same time. So for one, I don't know if you guys have been following, there's a movie called Cuties that came out that is supposedly, I haven't watched it, but it has ties to pedophilia and that kind of thing. And it won some awards at the Sundance Film Festival, and Twitter is absolutely destroying Netflix for this. They've got hashtags to cancel Netflix, all this. But then over here, we get people like me and my friends who watch some obscure shows on Netflix that all got canceled due to COVID. And for the same reason, we started trending cancel Netflix. I'm kind of embarrassed at how involved I was with this over the summer, but there's a show called The Society that I really liked, and they canceled it. And so me and some people on Reddit were trying to throw around the hashtag cancel Netflix, all this. And I wasn't aware of Cuties at the time, but the two storms merged together and created this ultra PR storm. So whenever you read any stories on Netflix, on any news site, it says there's all these people that are mad about the Cuties thing, and then there are all these people that are mad about Netflix canceling shows before they finish the story. And that is a huge threat model, because it's threatening the subscriber revenue to Netflix. So what we see then is Netflix has recently lost $9 billion because of this storyline. So you know that someone somewhere is going to pay for that. And this is all the things that you guys need to be thinking about when you create your apps, is what are the ways you can be destroyed, because nothing is invincible. All right, so have I talked about all of this already? So whenever there's a threat, whenever there's a threat that gets newly discovered, because there will always be new threats because things are always innovating, one of the ways to do it is to put it into a report, describe it, attack it. Mitigations you can do to threats are put them together, keep reports, keep auditing, that kind of thing, so that people who are developing the app know about the threat before it happened. I'm thinking, are they not net positive on how many individuals have been home for months? I assume their subscriptions rose before they fell. The problem is people are at home and can get mad about things that are like, if they had canceled my favorite show while I was back in Halifax, I would not have had time to get mad about it. But because I was home and essentially like working from the couch, I had tons of time to get mad about it. So because we're home, we're watching more and more Netflix, and Netflix is increasing in value to us. And for the record, I do have hobbies. I play a lot of video games, and I repair a lot of computers. Anyway, carrying on. With threats, we can report them, we can look at developing them, but we have to know about the threats before the bad guys do. Because as soon as a threat comes out and the people who created the threat, then the people who created the threat are out there, they have the upper hand because they know how the threat works better. But if we figure it out before they do, we're set. We validate the information. So when a threat comes to you and you are on the cybersecurity team, you have to investigate the threat and figure out how much damage it can do. So back when I worked for Pythian, there was like this bug that got announced for like Microsoft systems and the specific kind of processor that we used. And all morning, everyone was like, oh my God, it's the end. We could be attacked any minute. Then the cybersecurity team went and tried to replicate it, and they were able to replicate it. And they were like, you can't do anything with this. You'd have to have, it's a way in, but the way we have things configured, where it gets you is, what was I saying? The way it gets you is, you have to like it's a way in, but it has to have another way from that. And you're right, Jared, I do have too many hobbies, so everything's on the wall. Okay, so the next thing that's kind of interesting is the threat of privacy. So we seem to have rejected, as I've discussed, the model that our identities are for sale and that's how we should pay for things. And the problem with that is that privacy is incredibly hard to define, because to everyone, it's a little bit different. So there are some people who they're introverted, they don't ever even have people over, and in their room, like they're much more protected, and they don't even tell people their middle names or who they vote for. Then there's people that are so open and so free to the world. They don't even need walls. Their policy is they're comfortable with who they are, and if somebody wants to look, well, that's their own fault. And you get kind of a mix of that, and it has to do a lot with how a person feels safe. So what people have done in research is tried to define how privacy is to other people. So to some people in 1890, for example, privacy was just the right to let alone. Because, for example, like I remember whenever I see an old cowboy movie or anything, a Western, there's always some scene where there's somebody just sitting by a fire reading a book. And it always just seems kind of like a nice thought because there's nothing else they could do. They don't have TV, they don't have the internet. They're reading a book, no one's there to disturb them. To them, back in the day, that was privacy. But we don't live that way anymore. So now we think of privacy as what are our defenses against the ways people can come into our lives? So that becomes privacy is what are our settings on social media? What are our work hours? So for example, I will respond to emails, student emails, the second I'm aware of them because I can't stop thinking about them, but I don't extend that privilege to everyone. So there are times when emails arrive in my inbox, but they don't get dealt with until the next day because that's my personal boundaries. And privacy becomes this definition of what are your boundaries, and what do you share? Like it becomes almost like a firewall. What are you talking about? And what you talk about, not what are you talking about? And that becomes a very hard thing to define because what I define as privacy for myself is likely not what you would define as privacy. So we look at memes like this and say, well, who are we sharing this with on Facebook? Public, anybody, our friends, and just the CIA? Because the way most people in privacy look at it is, if you share something online, you have it. Who you share has it, and then CSIS or the CIA or any of the Five Eyes will have it too. So then some people started defining privacy as control over information. So I'm sure you've all, side question, when do you prefer we contact you? I have a question at 10 a.m. No, just email me whenever you feel like it. If I'm asleep or doing something else, I won't see it, but if I see it, I'll respond to you. Privacy is the claim of individuals, groups, or institutions to determine for themselves when and how what information should be used. So for example, I'm sure when we were all in high school at one point or another, some big juicy rumor came across our desk and we had to decide who we could tell. Then we say, okay, but you can't tell anyone, and then they make that decision. So when that piece of information arrives at your desk, you are making your choice of how that information can be shared. Then the original person who shared it with you won't like that you share it with them because they want control of the flow of that information. So when you share information, your mental model is that it can't possibly be interesting enough to share any further. But then when you find out the whole school is completely aware of the information that was shared, that becomes an issue of privacy because the original person lost control. So in some ways, privacy is a definition of control over information, but the problem is information is typically its own entity, and every time it becomes known by someone new, there's a whole new system of privileges, processes, and permissions for who it can be shared with. The converse of this is you can create your own information on the internet and pretend to be a dog or pretend to be someone you're not. And then we get into this whole idea of catfishing. Has anyone checked out the TV show on MTV? It's called Catfish. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I can't usually watch it in too many episodes at once because it gets depressing. But the plot of the TV show Catfish is somebody will contact them and say, hey, I've been in an online relationship for 3 years, and say, I've been talking to this person every day, but we've never met up, we've never video chatted, and we only ever talk on the phone, audio only. I think this is the person that's the love of my life, but they're 3,000 miles away and there's nothing I could do about it. Then they take this person and they say, okay, well, we've got the budget of MTV, so we can hire PIs and fly you anywhere you want to go. and then they hire PIs and find out this person really isn't who they say they were, and it turns out to be someone completely different, and then they milk the interaction for TV. But what's amazing to me is that this show coming out isn't stopping catfishing from happening. It's actually increasing the ways people are catfishing. So in the first season, they just talk about like Facebook, and they start looking at usernames and ways that you can connect to people. But in the more recent seasons, there was one guy who was like, he had a similar background to me actually, and they caught him with a very simple thing, which I thought was kind of depressing. But he was a cybersecurity major, and I forget how they got him exactly, but it was like he had like metadata or something, and he was able to Photoshop a picture of himself with that day's newspaper holding up a very specific message, and people believed it. So like they said, okay, prove yourself by showing a picture of you wearing this kind of t-shirt, holding up today's newspaper and holding up another paper that says, hey, it's me. And he was able to make a very convincing photo that proved this. And this was like he had really come up with a system. Like he was doing this to a lot of people, and it was really depressing, but like his skills were very impressive though. And I remember thinking, like, why would catfish people improve if they know this is happening and they know there's a TV show about this? Like, but still, people are so afraid of having their privacy invaded that they're willing to create their own new identities to share online, and it's earth-shattering for everyone to find out those identities are a complete farce and that there's really a scared person behind them. And that's something that's very interesting to me in privacy, is they'll want so much privacy they can't even be who they are. All right, so if privacy is breached, what are things that can happen? Well, monetary, so I've already talked about this. Credit cards can be people who fake their identities online to win arguments. Typically in academia, we call that plagiarism. So if somebody says, hey, I've got like 4 PhDs in this, and it turns out they're just a high school student with Wikipedia, that actually happens way more often on Reddit than you'd believe, but people use it to be more than who they think they can be in real life. Like they project, right? It happens all the time in politics. What happened with what's the thing that Trump was quoting, the hydrochloroquine or something? People say stuff, and because they have backing in other areas, people listen to them. And that's one of the things about privacy, is people project their insecurities as strengths on the internet, then that causes misinformation, fake news, and bad things to happen. So consequences of this are criminal activity. We can have people, we can have scams, we can have fraud, loss of face. People can lose reputation for themselves, for their company, for their degrees. So for example, one of the reasons Dal cares so much about plagiarism, if you've ever actually sat down to wonder this, and I remember when I went to my first plagiarism seminar as a graduate student, and somebody said this, and I couldn't believe it never occurred to me. But every single time somebody goes out into the industry with a Dalhousie degree and an employer thinks they aren't a good worker, it lowers the quality of all of our degrees by just a little bit. And if word gets out that we let people copy and paste their way through the degree, that takes down the value of our degrees even more. And so it's really important that we make sure that our identity as a university is strong suit, and that we don't have this we don't have this sort of fake reputation. So the piece of paper is, someone just mentioned this is why they care not for the piece of paper. Well, the piece of paper is more useful than you think, but it's not your identity. But if you get out in the workplace and somebody says, oh, Dal, we've hired people from there before and it's not so good, that's not going to make you feel too good, because you worked very, very hard. And people who create a false identity of knowing more than they do, or who fake their credentials, they can damage the university and thereby damage all of us who worked very hard and associated with it. Oh, this is a classic. I love explaining this one. So this one time when I was working for defense, I got this call, and it was this lady who was saying, I found a bunch of naked and racy pictures on this computer. And she took screenshots of every single one of those naked or racy photos and sent them to me over whatever platform we were using. And I was like, wonderful, you've just caused a Trans Act violation and we're all gonna pay for this. So a Trans Act violation is when information is disclosed that is at the wrong level. So like if secret information is viewed by somebody without secret, or if there's privied information that has now slipped into channels it didn't need to slip into. So because she sent those images to me to report them, I got away with it because I was the one who was being reported to. But she was talked to as well because she reproduced these images and then tried to distribute them to another member in the government. So what's happened now is there was this one person who had broken the rules, but his privacy was now disclosed through other channels. And so now we have to go and scrub more channels than we need to. It's not just, hey, we have to go talk to this one person. It's now that data has been duplicated and redistributed. So now we don't know how far it's gone. And if it gets out that people who work for the military are looking at this kind of stuff, it can make a pretty big scandal for the organization. So they had to go and scrub everyone. And I got asked if I deleted everything. And I was the one who did the thorough report. So they came by and said, congrats, did you retain it? I said, no, it's all gone. But if this was criminal code violating images, would I have been liable? No, I would not have been. So in the past, so what happens is if I had taken them and said, hey, everyone in the office, look how funny this lady is. I could have gotten in trouble, but I immediately got up, said to my direct supervisor, this has happened. And he said, great, we're going to deal with this. So because I reported it, took it through the proper channels, everything was fine. But because the lady reproduced them is a huge problem. What's happened in the past with criminal code violations has been a lot more complicated. So there were some cases, let's see, I'm trying to think of a good example. I never was exposed to any criminal code violations. I've just heard secondhand stories. I told one lady in the military at one point that had just done a long-term stint in security that I wanted to do the job that she had done because I liked the idea of basically being the security police, cybersecurity police for defense. Because she got access to every single building and she could go anywhere she wanted to and lecture anyone she wanted to on security policies. And I would have absolutely loved to have gone to like the chief of defense staff and been like, bad, you cannot write your passwords on a sticky note. That would have been so much fun for me. And I said, so why would you give that job up? And she said, because I had to go to counseling for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I said, how does that happen? And she said, I'll give you a hint. I can't hug my niece and nephew anymore without having a panic attack. They're 6. And I was like, oh, good God. So what you see in those roles can be very damaging. All I know is whatever happened, the person was dealt with. They were arrested. They lost their job immediately, everything else. But she was the one who found whatever this was. And when she reported this to me, she told me about this with minimal information as possible. I couldn't tell you when, where, how, anything like that. I remember just thinking like, oh my God, like that sounds super rough. So this accidental disclosure can be a huge problem on people, not just on systems, because if you see something that shouldn't be there and it now enters your brain, which is actually an information system itself, it can cause damage to you. Like if you see people, like when you have the superpower to read other people's emails and you see them talking about you, or you have the superpower to look in people's Q drives and you see things that are illegal, it will have an effect on you. And that's one of the reasons privacy is so important. Like whenever I've in the past had access to that kind of thing, people always say, don't you get curious? And I'm like, ever since I talked to that one lady, I do not venture into these things, because whatever it is that I could be after that could be worth it to me via, is it the list of who's going to get promotion? Is it the list of all of those things that I'd be curious about are vastly outweighed by the things that I don't want to know. And that's a huge lesson to anyone who wants to go into security, is you have to be comfortable with the idea that there's information out there that you truly do not want to know. Okay, let's see. What's this one? Are we going to a new topic? Okay, I talked about that already. So how privacy rights are protected. So we talk a lot about policy. So when information is protected, when information is disclosed, who deals with it depends on the deal with the organization, but every province in Canada, including the territories, have a privacy council that can deal with these kinds of things and look at privacy laws. And we also have one for a federal government as well. So we can look at privacy not only through policy, but we can also look at it through architecture. So things like permissions, administrator accounts versus standard accounts. You get into a little bit of trouble with there's always, whenever you do that strategy, there's always something you need that you don't have access to, then there's always waiting on getting the permissions for it. But it is a good architecture for keeping people who are a little bit nosy out of the way. So then we can talk about degrees of identifiability. So 0, something that can be directly linked to a specific identity. So for example, if ever I was working for the feds, let's say CRA, and I saw a social insurance number and outstanding tax information and an arrest warrant, that would be a huge violation, because I would be able to uniquely identify a Canadian that is about to face legal charges and have problems with the police. And the dangers there are twofold. One, if I knew who they were personally, I could tip them off and they could maybe escape the police, and that would be a huge problem for our law enforcement team to deal with. Or I could know who they are and lose respect for them when they turn out later to be innocent, and that information could get out. There's really no recovering from identity theft, in my opinion. There's things that are close, but it's always gonna be out there. Does everyone remember the story in 2010 of that serial killer that used to be a colonel in the Canadian Forces? His name was Russell Williams. He had a cottage in Tweed, Ontario, and they traced everything to his cottage neighborhood. And because, okay, well, you can look him up on your own time. His name is Russell Williams. He used to be, he's serving a life sentence, but he used to be the colonel of the biggest Air Force base in Canada. And he was linked to all these murders, but because of who he was and because of his position, the police kept ignoring his name every time it came up. So his vehicle and scent and a few other things were traced to his cottage in Tweed, Ontario. And the police started going door to door, and they said to this guy, "Oh, who's in there?" And he said, "Oh, that's Russell Williams. He's the colonel of this." And they said, "Oh, we won't even bother with him." And then the next day they sent a SWAT team to the first guy's house because they decided that Russell Williams was above suspicion. That was 10 years ago. And the most recent documentary I saw on this, that guy was saying he still gets dirty looks in the neighborhood, even though he had nothing to do with the crime. He just lived next to somebody who was above suspicion. His name has been completely cleared. It's been put in newspapers many times. It's been discussed as sort of like this weird little thing that people don't forget as a quirk. But because he was accused, and because it was so public, because a SWAT team is not something that is what I would call subtle, his identity was tarnished, even though it had nothing to do with it. So identity and privacy are things that are very hard to recover from. Like obviously this person is living a normal life, he still has a job, but every once in a while, he catches whiff of like the legend of like, oh, what did that guy do? Let's go back. So then we can look at things like pseudo-anonymous data. So for example, if I have a ton of B0 numbers at Dalhousie, let's say I have 100 of them, and I have no way of figuring out who they relate to, I've got identifiable data, but it's not identifiable to me. So in the sense that somebody else with more access could verify the data and link it to somebody, but on its own, there's a layer of abstraction that I don't know how to deal with. And then finally, there is anonymous unlinkable data, which is data that there's no way to trace back to the source. This is often what we use in research. So if I do a survey with, like, for example, for my thesis, I had 407 participants, and the only thing I kept of them that was identifiable was their ID for Amazon Mechanical Turk to pay them. But as soon as I paid them, I deleted that so that there was no way to link their responses back to who they were. However, had I had access to AMT's support team, I would have identified them. The other thing is I had a problem with Amazon Turk where I accidentally set the time limit too short, and some guy emailed me and said, "Hey, I just did your survey, but it was too short to get paid. Can I still get paid?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. What's your ID number?" And because of this problem, I now know one of the Amazon Mechanical Turk ID numbers that links to a person. I've deleted it now, but for that moment, I could have identified his responses. I didn't, but I could have. Yeah. Issues to consider. We think of privacy as a secondary task, so I've presumably done a very good job of scaring you all on the dangers of privacy in the last 20, 30 minutes. However, when most people log on to do things, they find privacy to be a hindrance. No one goes online to be private. They go online because people need to do things. If we didn't need to do things, we wouldn't need the internet. Users also have different privacy issues, and users are not privacy experts. People presume to have privacy they don't have. So this one time when I caught a guy that had the Lord of the Rings trilogy on his network drive, I told him, "Hey, I found this, so bye, it's going to delete it." And he said, "How dare you access my Q drive? No one should be allowed to access that. I'm the only one with access." And I was like, "Dude, there's like 300 people in this city that could look in there whenever they want to because they're administrators." And he was like appalled to learn that. And he's like, "That can't be right. I'm going to go check with my superiors." And he was not pleased to learn that that was not the case. So then we have to look at who are the users of the system, data sharers, and observers. So if I'm a user, that means I'm contributing to the community, but I'm not necessarily sharing or seeing data. So if I've just got an account and nothing else, I'm a user. But on Instagram, for example, I can be an observer by just lurking Instagram and never posting. But if I look at Instagram and I post, I can also be a sharer. So there's different relationships I can have with different sites for sharing data and looking at data. So for example, on Instagram, I can look at the data for almost anybody as long as they're open profile and they've approved me. So then we've mutually agreed to be data observers of each other. But that there's also still some degree of data I can get without that. And when I post, I am sharing data. I am becoming a data sharer with everyone that I have agreed to be an observer with in contract. Does that make sense to everyone? Like, we kind of create these contracts online of, I agree to share data with you, I agree to observe data. So when you get those notices that say, "Hey, we're using cookies," you have to agree. What they're saying is, to use our site, you have to be willing to be a data sharer because that's the only way we can monetize. So like a terms of service is exactly right. So then we have to think about, like, what's the potential for malicious data observers? Well, I can steal your identity. The more data you share with me, the more I observe, and the more I observe, the more I can build. What is the value of the data? If I share my data, it becomes valuable. There was one of my favorite all-time scams was this app that was like, log into Gmail and approve us, and we'll tell you what your information would be worth on the dark web. And then they would sell your information for the amount of money they told you it was worth. So people would log in with Gmail. It would say, your account is worth $8 because you've got these accounts. And then they would share that info. It was hilarious. Okay. So then we think about, how is personal information collected? Who has control? How is it shared? Like, do you push information up? Like, do I have to agree to upload, or is it pulled from the metadata? So like, if I have to say I'm going to share this information, and I upload it, I'm pushing it. But if every time I make a click, that click is recorded, that data is pulled. And it's hard to keep track of what data they're pulling because there's so many ways to record that. Like every time I click on a new link, if I click on that link, it could be sending a thing to a database. Like there's no way to know, especially if the data is pre-rendered on the server side. How much information is shared? Is it one-time data when I share my picture? Is it discrete data, like every time I click something? Or is it continuous, like everything I'm doing is recorded? And how long is it retained? The answer is probably forever, but it could be, sometimes there are laws in Europe that say it has to be only a certain time. How does it take place? How much control do we have? Do our default settings preserve it? These are questions you have to think about when you're making your apps. Like, what are you doing to make sure that the user has full control? Facebook loves to make you think you have control, then reset your settings every time they reset their end user license agreements. I have a new hobby. It's called phishing. I send fake banking emails to gullible executives, then I find out their financial information, use it to steal money they don't deserve. Dear customer, this is your bank. We forgot your social security number and password. Why don't you send them to us so we can protect your money? Sincerely, IB Banker. Looks legit. This is actually how they get people. Firefox is my favorite browser for a reason. They are considered to be the last truly private browser because they believe that users should not have to deal with privacy themselves. They believe that users should be given the default strong privacy settings and should be able to increase them or decrease them without affecting usability. So in Firefox, in the latest version, you can decrease your settings or increase them in terms of privacy. But if you increase them, it'll give you a warning saying, just so you know, if you increase them, you might break some websites. For example, I used to watch a lot of Dr. Phil on CTV. I'm glad I kicked that habit, but the CTV used to break with high privacy settings because of how much tracking was being done. So remember, if your site, if the site you're using is free, you're the product, and you'll find that things like privacy tools will either break the site or get the site to tell you not to use it. Then you have to download more tools to fill it with that. Okay, so your concerns might not be aligned. I think I'm considered an air quote expert in cybersecurity at this point. I don't like to call myself that, but I will for the purpose of this example. If you compare me to my buddy who's a firefighter, he's been my best friend since he was kindergarten, and he was never good at school, but he was always good at sports. And now it turns out that I'm an academic and he's a firefighter. So it's kind of interesting when our things collide. And whenever we talk about computers, his interests are very different than mine. So he always advocates for Android and Google because of true customization and what they can do. And he always says, well, why would you want an iPhone other than, for the Rolex type idealism? And I always say, because of privacy. And he goes, well, what's the point of privacy if you can't do anything? So he's got this mentality of the internet is to get a job done. He doesn't care if his privacy is exposed. He wants things done efficiently. Whereas me, who knows how this technology works and is frankly scared of it at times, has a very different idea. So when I think about security, I'm the kind of person who doesn't think that unlocked doors should be unlocked unless the door is being used. So I think of keys in a very different way than he does, but he thinks of keys as actually kind of a hassle, so he never locks his door. And no one's ever broken into his house in 15 years or 20 years he's lived there. So his argument based on that amount of data is actually pretty good. But then when he gets robbed, he's going to say, oh, I should have listened to you. But, it's a give and take, right? To me, I'm saying, I know that there are bad people out there. I've met them. I've seen them on the dark web. I know what they can do. They can do way worse stuff than I'm capable of. And I want to stop them before they get a chance. And he's saying, oh, I don't want to have to remember another password. I don't want to get stuck, So we have to find balances between that. Can he prove no one came into his home, though? Anyone could have come in and taken a peep. That's true. Nothing in the universe can detect passive observation. But I would think his response would be, if somebody came in and didn't take anything, um, that would mean he's got nothing worth stealing and therefore shouldn't lock the door. At least that's what I would think he would say. Um, so security should be invisible. In my opinion, the best security the user has absolutely no awareness of, and it only blocks out people that are trying to do harm. This is only in theory, as it's not actually possible to pull off in practice. But the idea is you don't feel the security. It should be like you can see cameras, but they don't affect you. Thumbprint locks or locks that never lock you out, you can see those, but they don't affect you. But when you get into alarms that go off every time you're trying to do anything, like my aunt down the street, she's got this, like, she's 85 or 86, and she's very frail, still lives on her own, and she's got this thing called Life Alert. And it's basically like it detects if she falls or something, she can like push something on her wrist, and it's like a 911 call. And this thing has had so many damn false alarms that she's one warning away from having to pay like a fee for false alarms. And to me, that's not good security. That's actually the opposite, because it's now causing damage to her. It's causing financial stress. It's causing physical stress. The neighbors are starting to be concerned about her, so it's causing social stress. So that security is not invisible. Exactly, Jared, you're quite right. So you want to persuade the user to adopt the security, but you don't want it to get in their way, because if you're trying to convince someone of doing something and it's more work or it takes more brain processes, they're going to abandon it. So they have to be trained. So we have to look at when approaches might work, show them examples of it working well and examples of it working poorly. I talked to you guys about this already. So these are ways. Actually, we won't talk about that one. Why do humans fall for phishing? Not motivated, pay attention to training. They think security is not their problem. They say things like, there's so much data and people out there that the odds of being attacked are minimal. While that's true, recovering from identity theft and financial stress is very difficult. And it's also quite hard to prove identity theft, especially nowadays. Need actionable advice they can understand, so we have to show them why they need it in ways that actually make them want to use it. So how do we get people trained? We have to show them we have to persuade them in ways that actually get them excited about security, aware of the threat. Like, this is what salespeople do, is they create the idea of artificial risk or artificial threat, and they get people to defend against it. So what some companies do you think we can move away from phishing vulnerability? Do you think we can move away from phishing vulnerability by returning more to a something you have instead of something you know strategy? Actually, that might talk well into this slide. So what some companies have started doing is phishing their own employees. And then when someone falls for it, they go and have a discussion with the employee about what to look for with clicking links and that kind of thing. And this has actually been proving to be quite resourceful, as it's showing people in a way that's entirely a teachable moment that they could have caused a lot of damage to the company, and rather than punishing them for it, they come down and say, hey, you actually clicked on this link, and this was a test, and what could have happened is this. And it actually really opens their eyes, because those talks can be quite embarrassing for them, but at the same time, there's no disciplinary action taken that there could have been, that there could have been if there was actually a breach. Because like, if you were the source of a breach, someone's head has got to roll, and who better than the attack point? So then you can show them how you were tricked. Once they've been tricked, you can show them how, show them the things to look for, and then out of fear, and honestly probably a passionate interest, they will start looking for tips again. So show them the lock, show them if you hover over a link, it'll show you what the actual link is. If ever there's a phone number in the email, Google the phone number instead to make sure that it's the right phone number. Just things like that, so that there's a third party source of information that doesn't redirect you to malicious users. So this product called Fish Guru has been useful for training people to avoid being caught by phishing. And apparently, according to this research, I haven't read this paper in ages, people were 28 days later less likely to fall for phishing than they were beforehand. And then there's, looks like gamified learning that they were doing. So in the end, we just want to know the user, work experience, education level, age, previous computer experience, time available for learning and training, available hardware, social context of use, and then we want them to get them to understand the specific tasks. So we would not train someone like you in the way that we would train someone like someone that's, let's say, in their 50s, how to spot phishing. We want to make sure that they know who they are, we know what their learning strategy is, and that their available risks are. Because we are more, as the younger generation, are more aware of technology risks than the older people, and the older people just want to get through the remainder of their working career so they can retire. So show them the context of the risks in terms of, you could lose your job if you're the source, and that might be more motivating to them than you could get hacked, because they don't know what that means. Okay, let's see what we have here. Understanding the usage context. So we have to look for what processes are happening, what processes are at risk, what can that mean to you? And this becomes an awareness of what could actually be a danger in terms of attacks with your applications. So we look at usability and desirability, and how things like reason go away from things like emotion. So I want something that works and works well, but oftentimes the best tools that work well require the most finicky and finesse. So for example, the rational part of my brain says I should use Vim as a text editor for everything. For those of you who haven't used Vim, it's got one of the steepest learning curves in software. And it's very efficient when you use it correctly. But there are technologies that are similar, like Microsoft Word or Nano or Pages, that you just type. And when you just type, the words come out and it's simple. But with VI and Vim, you can run very specific search commands, very specific find and replace commands. And it's like almost a mathematical way of writing. And there are people that are incredibly good with it. It's a fantastic text editor if you know what you're doing. But it is not something that works if you wants a quick game. It's the same thing with LaTeX. Those of you who've written in LaTeX before, it is a very steep learning curve, but you can make some fantastic and beautiful things, but it is not something that you can just sit down and type. You have to go through and learn. And so we separate the needs of reason from the needs of emotion, and that makes it really hard to design apps that hit both. So you can imagine how much harder it is to design security that hits both. So society's expectations reset every time a radical new technology is developed. So every time there's a new hack or a new piece of technology or anything else that comes out, people's ideas change, news comes in all the time. My favorite was when CNN referred to the hacker known as 4chan, which was a complete misunderstanding of what 4chan is. It's a message board, but they viewed it as an entire hacker. And then for a while, everyone on CNN was afraid of the hacker known as 4chan coming after them too. We cannot accelerate the process. We have to iterate through and look at making things usably secure all the time. Okay, and we are out of time. I got pretty close. Let me just make sure that there's nothing else I want to talk about. Yep. Okay, we're pretty well there. So that concludes my summary of Dr. Hockey's 4169 course. If anyone's interested, I highly recommend it. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. For participation today, those of you who came in late, I posted a link to W3 Schools showing how to do responsive web development. Just play with that and submit me a screenshot containing a desktop interface, a tablet interface, and a mobile interface. You can just change around the text and the color, so I know that you get the idea that you only have to change the content at one time for it to change on all three screens. Does anyone have any questions on today's lecture? No? Okay. Oops. Was there a low turnout today because of the storm, or was there no noticeable effect? There's about 40 of you in here, and 40 out of 65 is pretty good, I would think. But people also, there's also at least 10 people who live in a time zone 12 hours away, so I expect them to be watching later. If you're staying up late just to watch me, reevaluate your priorities. I'm not worth staying up late for. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, everyone have a good day. I will try to get this lecture up on Brightspace and YouTube by today or tomorrow. And if anyone has anything else, send me an email.